Hello, welcome to Sex Talk with Natasha. It's Wednesday night, 10 p.m. Central. I got a really great topic tonight talking about transgender folks and their sexuality and partners of transgender folks as well, and how we can help people in that population enjoy their sexuality, hopefully even more than they currently do. So we have a great guest on. Crystal's going to be on with us tonight. Before we get there, just a quick kind of overview on what Sex Talk with Natasha is about. This is a comprehensive sexual education forum for adults, and we just really love offering all kinds of resources. So Facebook Live events, Q&A, are a weekly aspect of this resource. It's a subscriber based. So we do offer the first few minutes of this, the first half hour is usually free, and then the whole rest of it is for subscribers only, but subscribers get a whole host of other resources as well. We have homeworks, daily actions, resources, all kinds of things that I post for subscribers, and also a community page where people can interact with one another who are subscribers. So we have a lot of fun. We hope that you find a lot of value in this. I try to usually make the metaphor of seeing your sexuality and your sexual health as something that you're hopefully having an ongoing priority towards. It's not something that just happens overnight or in a weekend or in one session. And the nice thing about this particular service is that it's very cost effective, so that for the same price that you might pay to see a professional, maybe 2 or 3 hours, you can get an entire year's worth of a subscription for a lot of the resources in psychoeducation that I think is important in helping you have better sexual health, sexual experiences, and sexual identity. So I'm a certified sex therapist, and I love offering this service. So if you find it valuable, please subscribe so that we can continue to offer it. And we are going to be announcing, I know I've been saying it for a few weeks now, but I promise by October, we'll be announcing some additional resources like group forums or webinars, live webinars that only subscribers will be able to access. So I'm really excited about that and getting ready to present that to all of you. So Ashley, you want to take it away as far as just a little bit more? Ashley's our producer, so give her a minute.
Yeah, welcome everybody. We're really excited to be back as always on our Wednesday nights. And for those that are just joining, this is an hour-long program. The first 15-20 minutes or so, Natasha will always give us a little bit of an education on the actual topic. And then we always bring our guest on for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And that's where the guest can ask questions. The guests can tell us their story, and Natasha kind of jumps in and gives her advice or, answers the questions. And then we always like to try to leave a couple minutes at the end to the audience, to the viewers. So go ahead and watch through the whole thing, obviously, and we always get to your questions and send us your questions. You can shoot us an email, you can private message us. We're on all the social media, so just send us your questions. The first half an hour is always free on Facebook, and the entire episode is over at Patreon. And obviously, Natasha already discussed some of the great benefits that you get, but you just head over to patreon.com/sextalkwithnatasha. And for anybody that is interested in seeing Natasha professionally, you can check out her online practice, Symmetry Solutions, and you can find that at symmetrysols, SOLS.com. So I'll pass it over back to Natasha.
Thank you. And another thing, just to remind everybody that the actual website, sextalkwithnatasha.com, is a great place to go and find everything archived. So Ashley does a really great job of organizing all the material and resources that we've kind of gotten put together for you so far. So that's a much easier way to access information, because if you go on the Patreon page, which is fairly similar to a Facebook page, it can get kind of hard to dive deep into all the things that we've been posting throughout the year. Okay, so let's get on the topic. So I'm gonna not probably offer a whole lot of information up front because I'm really interested in Crystal's questions, but I do want to just kind of, because the question is fairly large, how do we increase sexual satisfaction and sexual pleasure and sexual desire and all those things for those who are either transgender or partnered with a transgender person. And so that, as usual, can look really different for a lot of different people, depending on what types of things we're addressing as far as orientation, erotic templates, whether or not there's been sex reassignment surgery, whether or not there's hormonal treatments in place, whether or not there's been a coming out process or not yet, right? So people are kind of all over the spectrum in regards to their relationship with the identity of transgender. And that in of itself kind of complicates how this answer can be. So I'm really curious as to what Crystal's going to bring to the table. But I did want to just kind of make a few points. One being that we know through so much research, and it's such a big reason why I feel like this is such a passion of mine doing this with Sex Talk, is that we know that being able to enjoy our sexuality is a huge part of our psychological well-being. And when people are somewhat repressed or, discriminated against or have any type of social or cultural or religious bias that goes against kind of their own sexual orientation, identity, gender, identity, all of those things, then we kind of squelch people's sexual lifestyles or sexual experiences, and also sexual expression. So there's just so many things that can be affected negatively for people when they're not in a culture that is sex positive. And unfortunately with transgender folks, this is definitely the case in our current cultural climate. So we really don't have, I think the general public and doesn't have a lot of understanding around transgender issues. There's a lot of myths and biases out there around transgender folks. And so I'm really hoping that if you yourself are not transgender or have a transgender partner, that you would still be willing to listen to tonight's show, because I think just educating ourselves on a variety of sexual experiences of people around us can be so helpful when we come into play, when maybe we have a family member or a friend or a coworker who is dealing with some of these things, that we can approach these issues from a much more empathic and understanding and informed space rather than a biased or discriminatory or mythological space. So I'm hoping that people will tune in regardless of whether or not you identify as transgender. But being able to enjoy sex is a huge part of our psychological well-being, and the research shows that transgender people do face unique challenges, as I've kind of just mentioned, in regards to being able to have enjoyable sexuality. Now, this comes to play most likely for again, wide brushes here, two reasons. One is sexual behavior itself. So what type and frequency of sexual activities is a transgender person able to enjoy? And again, there can be things that can be impacting those things, whether it's just social or psychological maybe roadblocks, as well as how our hormones, how our, if there is any type of sexual reassignment surgery, is their ability to orgasm, is their ability to enjoy sexuality the way one would expect or want, and all of those types of things. So that definitely comes into play. The other wide brush is sexual feelings. So how does being transgender, especially with so much of the discrimination and kind of socializing that most transgender people have had to face at some level, how does that affect their desire? How does that affect their ability to tap into sexual pleasure? How does that affect their ability to really know themselves sexually, when even those of us who are very privileged struggle with those issues, right? And so like most of us struggle with sexual identity and sexual expression. So imagine having a situation where you've been discriminated against most of your life, it becomes that much harder. Now, two aspects that show up in the research as far as things that can help transgender folks have more positive or report more positive sexual experiences is, I guess, measuring one is their psychological well-being in general. So people who are fairly resilient, who have good mental health, who have good maybe community resources, have good networks, maybe have whatever, a variety of resources that would help their mental health well-being overall, tend to have that then correlate into their sexual experiences, which that generally makes sense. I mean, I think, again, that's probably true for all of us. You know, if we're dealing with super big time clinical depression, whether you're trans or cis, it's probably going to affect your sexual pleasure. So general well-being is really important. And then number two is the body satisfaction. So this, again, is something that most of us deal with, is body image issues. But imagine from, again, that extra layer that a trans person is going to bring to that equation, whether they're worried about their appearance, whether they're dealing with some level of gender dysphoria, whether or not they have the resources to access medical care, such as hormonal treatments, gender reassignment surgeries, whether or not they're satisfied with how their genitals look, or their breasts, or their, you know, their body and their shape. I mean, so many things that I think, again, from a cis perspective, we just take for granted and we struggle with anyway. And so imagine, again, that extra layer for trans people, that body satisfaction can be a big part of whether or not they can really kind of give into that abandon that is required for sexual satisfaction and sexual pleasure. So if we're worried about how we look and whether or not, you know, our body looks a certain way, or we don't like how our body looks, oftentimes that can really interfere with that. So those are kind of some basic, very basic generalizations about trans folks in regards to what we know can play a role towards sexual satisfaction. And I'm really looking forward to Crystal bringing some more specific questions. So welcome to the show, Crystal.
Hello, hello.
Hi. So can you give us just a little bit of your own personal kind of story and how you come to be at the point where you're going to ask me these questions? tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a transgender woman. I've had various sexual experiences through my life. Was only sexually active about, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago is when I started that. But since I knew from when I was very young, I knew that there was that the way I felt about my body was very different, and it felt really weird. And any sort of sexual feelings or any way that I would act sexually felt very odd and strange to me, because it kind of felt like I had something on my body that shouldn't be there, and it felt really strange. Just like, how do you engage in sex in something that you're like, I hate this thing? Like, how does that work? But I took hormones, started about 3.5 years ago, and I noticed that there was a dramatic change. Like, we talk about the differences between estrogen and testosterone, but the way that your body programs and looks through orgasms, especially, are very, very different. With testosterone, it's more about, here's the sensation, where when you're on estrogen, it's much more about a mental process, which for transgender women can make something harder, because when you're not trying to focus on your body, but you have to think mentally, it's sometimes a little bit hard to make all those connections work. But it is something that, you know, you learn to work through with it. And I mean, you just try the best that you can at the end of the day. But
that's such an interesting perspective for you to bring to the table, right? In essence, that you've had the opportunity to have orgasms with more male testosterone or hormonal body, and now you're having these orgasms more from a female orgasmic hormonal perspective, and that you can tell the difference and how that plays out for you. So that's wonderful information for you to share.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because not only is it the way that you have to mentally get to orgasm differently, but the orgasms themselves feel differently. If you imagine just like a flat sea, that is just kind of how I would imagine just the orgasm I had before. Right now, it's more of like a tidal wave, where sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. Sometimes it's, I'm elated for the next hour and I can't think straight. Other times it's just like, that was okay. And it's interesting to see that variance differing almost like this, cycles that happen from estrogen, that they're also playing in the ways that you get sexual desire, and with those being based on how focused you are and what your mental thought and state are. It's very interesting. It's also what I found remarkable is that the way that your body feels pleasure and wear gets completely reprogrammed. It's like when you grow breasts, they feel, suddenly you have a new wave of sensation in different areas. You would have been like, that feels okay before, but so does touching my arm. But now it's like, oh wow, that's a lot of sensation there.
So
And
these erogenous zones have shifted in your
Mhm.
body that you've noticed. Yeah.
And we know that transgender men that happens too, because when they're on testosterone, their clitorises grow a considerable length and then tend to want to be treated more like penises rather than clitorises.
Right, and there is a bit of a difference in
Just
how
a little bit, just a little bit.
yeah, how we like to be stroked, or the amount of pressure, or the sensations that are just different from in regards to what hormones are in your system. So that's really fascinating. So given all of that, because it sounds like you've been fairly self-aware then in regards to how some of these things have shifted for you and changed over time, what are some of the questions that you're bringing to the table today?
So one of the questions I have is that you have all these different physical changes that happen, and what is one, like if you had a transgender like person asking, just like, how would you best have someone become more acquainted with your body, especially when that body may or may not be comfortable for them at that time?
Repeat the question. How would
So,
they be comfortable with a partner?
well,
Touching
like
the body
even
or
with a partner or
themselves?
with themselves, to like how would you suggest for individuals to reacquaint with themselves sexually?
That is a great question. And again, I think that this is something that everybody should be doing, and yet for trans people it's kind of like exacerbated, right? Because like all of these shifts, it is in a sense almost like a new body in some ways when you're going through some of these hormonal shifts and surgeries or whatever it is you're doing. And so I guess I would give two different thoughts. One is the mirror exercise. And this isn't just for your genitals. I think that this is a nice thing to do just kind of with your body in general. So if you can stand nude in front of a mirror, a full body length mirror, and just really get used to looking at yourself in a non-judgmental way. I think many of us are very accustomed to looking at ourselves in a very judgmental way. And, you know, and some people even avoid the mirror because they don't want to see, you know, the parts of their body that they're not comfortable with. And to really kind of do a mindfulness type of exercise where you, in a sense, do a body scan. Maybe you can thank your body for being where it's at. You can acknowledge the body's maybe weaknesses or stretch marks or scars, in the sense of it being part of your journey of what you've been through as a person. And then, of course, also doing the mirror exercise in particular with your genitalia. And I think for both men or women, to be able to look at their scrotum, their clitoris, their ways that their genitals have changed, especially through hormone replacement, and a lot of trans people don't necessarily do either hormone or do sex reassignment surgeries, and so yet they have come out, and even the coming out process can have them have a very different relationship with their genitalia. So in a sense, just kind of being able to look at yourself and notice, what do I notice? You know, do I have a negative thought? Do I have negative chatter? Do I have positive chatter? Do I have cognitive distortions that come up? Am I able to challenge some of those distortions and be able to breathe, you know, do a breathing exercise and be more kind towards my body, is generally can be a very helpful exercise. So that's one thing that I would offer. The next thing that I would offer is sensate focus exercises. And you can Google those. I also have a nice, I think, PDF as part of the Sex Talk with Natasha show about how sensate focus can work. And what sensate focus is, it's like an ability, it's more of a partnered exercise to, not in a non-sexual way, really learn how to both receive and give pleasurable touch. And pleasurable touch doesn't need to be sexual touch, right? So it can be just, you know, that feels nice and that feels comfortable, and allowing yourself to be seen, to be touched by your partner, to understand what those sensations are like, and then to do the reverse, to be a giver of those touches and see what that's like, with none of the goal being having sex per se, right? So the goal is just really to enjoy each other's giving and receiving of touch. And this can be done at different levels, so that you can start out with fully clothed, or you can have like certain types of clothes on, like maybe silky lingerie, or, you know, only have boxers on, or so it doesn't have to be completely nude right away. So if people are a little less comfortable, and then you move towards the space where you are completely nude. And at first the touch can be just on like the arms and the legs, and the shoulders and the hips, maybe, you know, and you avoid kind of maybe more of the erogenous or genital zones. And then you can step up from there as well, so that you allow yourself that time to get used to those sensations, to not have the pressure of, oh, this touch means we're going to have sex. You know, it's just the only job is to enjoy the sensation. And so that can be a very useful exercise. Is that kind of what you're looking for, those types of suggestions? Okay. All right. I think also just being very mindful about, because of that body satisfaction research, just being very mindful of negative body shaming messages, and having some strategies that you can start. You know, sometimes I just imagine a stop sign, like, stop, I don't have to think that way. Or I could think of myself flicking a thought away, like, bloop, you can just go away, you know? And so having, whenever you have those negative, like, I'm not sexy enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not handsome enough, I'm not big enough, I'm not small enough, you know, whatever, I'm not enough type of messages, you can have a few little strategies that, from a cognitive behavioral standpoint, of dismissing them. And there's lots of different strategies that you can do in that regard as well. All right, do you have another question?
So another question I have is a little bit more on the serious side. Like, for the transgender community, sexual assault is something that happens in a, unfortunately, alarmingly incredible rate. It's around 50% or higher for individuals who are transgender. So for a person that is either a partner or someone that is an individual who suffered sexual assault, how do you offer them to either rekindle their sex life, or to come to terms with themselves following that happening, especially with the fact that having that uncomfortability with the body is already a problem?
Yeah, so if you've been a victim or survivor of any type of sexual assault, especially in the trans community, that is very, very difficult stuff to process, and giving yourself the time to heal, and hopefully having resources in place, you know, that, and most communities do have, even if you just start at the Pride Center of any local community, they can kind of tap you into services, even low-cost services, things of that nature, because it's so important to get the support that you need for just the trauma piece itself, right? Just healing from the trauma piece. And sexuality is a part of that. A lot of times we ignore our sexuality in the healing piece of the trauma. And so if you are either, I think your question is more about people who are now finding themselves in a partnered situation where the partner is willing to be part of the healing process. And so in a sense, it's a fairly safe environment. And so then how do you step into that space together? And I would really recommend partners being willing to go to the trauma treatment as well, to be part of that, to kind of understand and have strategies that the therapist or counselor can help both people know how to deal with situations. For example, it can be very common to be in the middle of a sexual activity and all of a sudden have the person who was victimized freeze, or have a negative response, or have an intrusive thought. that interrupts their sexual play. That's a very common experience. And oftentimes both people feel bad about that, right? So the partner's like, you know, I better stop, or I better not say anything, or should I say something, or should I stop, or should I pretend it's not, you know, what should I do to be supportive? And the person who's been victimized can also have a lot of that, like, oh, maybe they didn't notice, maybe I can pretend nothing's happening, I can just ignore it and push through, or I need to stop and then I feel guilty because it's not their fault, you know. So all of these like ways that people oftentimes with really wonderful intentions end up hurting each other when all they wanted to do was support each other, right? And so I think it's really important to have strategies in place so that you know that you can push a pause button at any time, and that doesn't, and both of you know how to react to the pause button, you know, and that you can be very careful about meaning rets, that this doesn't mean that you did anything wrong, or that I did anything wrong, or that this was even about us, you know. Just sometimes the body responds in a certain way. I mean, that's kind of like what a trigger is. You don't have a lot of control over it. So it doesn't have to mean much more than that. If we want to re-engage after a moment like that, how do we go about doing that? If we want to just push pause until next day or next week, that's fine too, right? And how do we make sure that both people's needs and communications can be part of that scenario? So I think that's a really profound question. I do think that sexual violence is, unfortunately, like you said, a very common experience to people who are in a relationship with a transgender person or a transgender themselves. And so being aware of that, having a lot of conversations outside of the bedroom about that. So don't wait until you're in that space where you're like, oh no, what do we do now? But just, you know, being willing to ask questions. Have you been a victim of sexual assault? Is that hard to talk about? Is that something that we could talk about together? Are there things that you know would be helpful in a moment where you might be having an intrusive thought? You know, what types of things are calming? Can we cuddle? Do you need space? You know, some people would like body contact that's non-sexual. Some people don't want any body contact. You may want either one depending on the day. So this is why communication, I think, is so important. And if you're a partner and are willing to be part of that healing process, you can be profoundly effective. But you also have to be self-caring as well, because you can't, as the partner, always, you know, be in that role of caring for the other person without also expressing your own needs, your own maybe sadnesses or disappointments about, yeah, sometimes it is hard when I have to stop midway, but that doesn't mean I don't want to, but it still is hard. Like, can both of those things coexist, and can we build our resilience in order to talk about those types of things? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Is that kind of what you're looking for there?
Yes, there was one part in particular I wanted to focus on. You talked about like setting the pause button. Do you suggest like a word or phrase? Because like, especially you're in the moment and you think the other person's like, yeah, they want to have this sexual event. How would you suggest navigating that particular instance in which you're fair to both partners while also not putting an unfair burden on the person who becomes traumatized in the sexual event?
That is, okay, so we're going to do a deep dive into that. And I'm guessing, Ashley, it's time to stop with Facebook Live. So we're going to talk about how to pause, and also what are some choices that you can do after a pause that can take care of both persons' needs. So I love that question. So Facebook Live, we are encouraging you to continue with us. Go to sextalkwithnatasha.com or patreon.com, sextalkwithnatasha. Either one will take you to the subscriber page, and you can continue in this conversation with us. It's been lovely seeing you all. Ashley, anything you want to say before we leave?
No, just thanks for joining. And again, we're still going. So head over to patreon.com/sextalkwithnatasha, and remember to check out sextalkwithnatasha.com for all of our resources listed in an organized fashion. And come on as a guest.
Oh yeah, we're always looking for guests. So make sure you contact either Ashley or myself if you're interested in doing what Crystal's doing and getting to spend an hour with me. I love spending an hour with people. So come join us on that regard as well. All right.